Well, it's a big one tonight at the Petersen Events Center. It's a late one tonight at the Petersen Events Center as Pitt will be taking on North Carolina at the Pete for a 9 o'clock tip-off. Get your naps, drink your afternoon coffee or whatever it is to get you to stay up. Pitt is going to need the energy in the building, people to be fired up and excited and rowdy and all of that. And I mean, we're not gonna spend too much time talking about the zoo and what the zoo needs to do and all that kind of thing, because we don't need to go too much on the students, but the students need to show up. The adults, you never know what you're going to get out of the adults, but the students need to show up, and the students need to be loud, and the students need to lead the charge on this one. Whenever it's a North Carolina possession, the students need to have that place blaring, and whenever it's a Pitt possession, they need to be giving a lot of energy to the team. That's what the students are there to do. That's what student sections are supposed to do in a big-time game, and this is a big-time game. No matter what North Carolina has done this season, no matter how the Tar Heels look, their success or their failures, of which there are quite a few, it's still North Carolina. When you're playing North Carolina as any team, it's a big game. When you're playing North Carolina as an ACC opponent, it's a huge game. When you get them at home for a 9 o'clock tip-off, man, that place should be a pressure cooker. It absolutely should be. I think it might be. We'll see. We'll see how it goes and how competitive the game is. But this is a huge game for Pitt on a lot of levels. It's sort of unique. I think Saturday at Syracuse was a really big game for Pitt. This game tonight is really big as well. You've got a stretch of games coming up here in the final, how many they have? Final 12 games with some really big opportunities. And this one tonight is absolutely one. Even if Carolina is not what Carolina typically is, this game is a giant opportunity, and that's not going to change. It stands as like I say, it's a chance for a very good win. So let's talk about what this game is. Let's talk about how this matchup can play out. Let's talk about where it fits and what it means for Pitt, what kind of opportunity is really there, and then what we think the Panthers need to do in order to win. What we're all looking for out of the Petersen Events Center tonight. So lots to discuss. Let's break it down. Pitt Carolina talk here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, there's different types of big games. I mean, there's obviously like the big games when you're playing Duke or you're playing those, top-ranked teams in the country, those quad one games. I mean, those are obviously huge. You need those on your resume to look really good and impress everybody. That's the flashy stuff that's going to get a lot of attention and get a lot of eyeballs. You went down and you beat Duke and your star player had, made 7 3-pointers and all that stuff. Like, that's flashy and exciting, and you got to win those. And to this point, Pitt has just one quad one win, the game at Ohio State. But there's obviously more to it than that. And I think about this a lot. There were a few games during the 4-game losing streak, maybe not the Duke game, but certainly I think Louisville, Florida State, and Clemson. And at various points, various people, on the message boards or on social media, said this is the biggest game of the season. This is the biggest game of the season for Pitt. This is a must-win game, biggest game of the year. And they were important games, and they were, big games for sure, and they were games that could have been all good wins. I mean, all 4 of those games, at Duke, at home against Louisville, at Florida State, home against Clemson, they all would have stood as quad one wins if Pitt could have pulled it off. And so that would have been huge to add those to the resume. But just as important, if not more so, is avoiding those losses at the other end of the spectrum, those quad 3 and quad 4 games. This game at Syracuse on Saturday was in that category. That was a quad 3 game. Pitt's got a handful more coming up. They have Virginia at home. They got Miami at home. They've got Syracuse at home. They've got Georgia Tech at home, and they've got Boston College at home. How many did I just say there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 more games out of the final 12 that are quad 3 or quad 4 games. And without getting like overly redundant of talking quad this, quad that, the reality is you have to avoid those bad losses. I think when we look at some of the reasons that Pitt missed the NCAA tournament last year, one was that their non-conference strength of schedule was held against them, and perhaps understandably so. But the other is that they had some of those bad losses. They had losses in the bottom 2 quadrants, and you have to avoid that. Sometimes, and I think we saw this last year with some of the teams from the Big 12, that wow, they had a terrible record in quad 1 games, but they played so many of them and they avoided all the bad losses that they got credit for it. It's like, well, you played a lot of tough games and you didn't lose any bad games. And right now, Pitt's trajectory is that. They're headed in that direction of, maybe not getting a lot of quad one games. There are opportunities still ahead, but maybe not getting a lot of quad one wins, but taking care of business, certainly in the quad 3 and quad 4 range. And even if you're going to go 1-8 or 1-10 or 2-9 or something like that in quad 1 games, you need to be pretty much perfect in the other 3 quadrants. And so that's why that game at Syracuse was so important. It didn't help Pitt that much to win the game, but it certainly would have hurt a lot to lose the game. And those are two different things, but they kind of overlap and become the same thing if you say you helped yourself by not hurting yourself. And beating Syracuse was key for that reason. Beating Cal, which was currently stands as a quad 3 game, was key for that reason. Stanford, which is just inside the range as a quad 2 game, but could slide into the third quadrant depending on how the Cardinal do. And incidentally, they beat North Carolina. But Stanford, currently a quad 2, could slide into that quad 3 quadrant. You took care of business. You didn't blow it against Eastern Kentucky or Sam Houston or VMI, Gardner-Webb, Murray State, Radford. All these were quad 3 and quad 4 games. You took care of business there, and you have to continue doing that. You couldn't let the Syracuse game get away, and you can't let it get away against Virginia, Miami, Syracuse again, Georgia Tech, or Boston College. You've got to do it there. Now, there are quad 1 opportunities still on this schedule. At Wake Forest on Saturday, at Carolina the next week, at SMU, and then, the game at Louisville on March 1st. Those are all quad 1 games, and they're going to be huge because they're opportunities for Pitt to get those good wins and those big wins. And I certainly wouldn't sit here and say, well, it's okay. Pitt doesn't need to win any of those games. They can get swept and still be in good shape. Anything they can do in those games will help their cause. If they can get wins in those games, it will help their cause, obviously, to put more of those good wins on. But in addition to taking care of business in those 5 quad 3 and quad 4 games, you've got a couple of these quad 2 games, like Carolina tonight, and like the game at Notre Dame and the game at NC State. Those are all currently quad 2 games. You really should take care of business there too. And these might be the games that are actually sort of the deciding factor. Like if you blow it in a quad 3 or quad 4 game, your NCAA tournament chances take a real dip with Pitt's resume as it's currently constructed. Obviously, if you can win some of these quad 1 games, and they're all on the road, all 4 of these that are still on the schedule, that's going to send your NCAA tournament chances up considerably. If it sort of all goes according to expectations and Pitt wins the quad 3 and 4 games and loses most, if not all, the quad 1 games, the deciding factor could come down to how they do in these quad 2 games. And that's where we come to tonight. Because this game against Carolina, as of yesterday, was number 40 in the net. When you play a game at home against a team ranked between 31 and 75 in the net, that counts as a quad 2. So, Carolina's just, 10 spots outside of quad 1. And a lot of times I think there's sort of overlap between 1 and 2. But Carolina represents a big opportunity in that regard. And not just because it's a quad 2 game, but because it sort of feels like one of those games that, Carolina sort of finds themselves in that quad 2 region, or that second quadrant, but they're kind of, I don't want to say they're not that good, but they definitely look vulnerable, and they've been vulnerable, all season. To the point where you can look around and find plenty of Carolina writers talking about what's wrong with this Carolina team, and there's a few things that are wrong with this Carolina team. Among the biggest ones is that they really never replaced Armando Bacot, and Harrison Ingram too, for that matter. Those guys were a big part of the success that Carolina has had over the last couple of years, and certainly were a challenge for Pitt to handle. Even when Pitt played well against Carolina and won games, it's not because Armando Bacot didn't play well. Well, there was that game down there, I think, the game with Nelly Cummings and Jamarius Burton in Chapel Hill. I feel like they actually did a good job defending Bacot. I think Federico did a good job. Federico did a good job on Bacot, and Bacot ended up getting his points, but most of his points were from the free throw line. He wasn't really getting much out of the offense. That was probably one of the better games that Pitt has played against Armando Bacot, but generally, he was a load. He was tough to defend. He was tough to stop. He was tough to beat on the boards, and Carolina doesn't have that guy this year. They have a couple of guys, Jalen Washington, Van Allen, Lubin are the guys who are trying to fill in that center spot, but they're not doing a great job. And so what you end up with is a Carolina team that one of the worst in the country at grabbing offensive rebounds, in terms of offensive rebound success rate and that kind of thing. Not a great rebounding team. They give up a lot of rebounds to the opponent. They've grabbed a lot of rebounds, but they also give up a lot of rebounds to the opponent. And I go to this point first when talking about this game and this matchup because it's one of my biggest concerns with this Pitt team is their poor rebounding and just how they haven't really gotten better. They, pretty much anytime they've been out rebounded by a high major opponent, they've lost. I mean, it's been the deciding factor, and some of them have not been close. I mean, they got out rebounded by Mississippi State by like 22. Duke out rebounded them by 15. The only exception was the Syracuse game when Eddie Lampkin had 50,000 rebounds and almost matched Pitt in rebounds himself. And Pitt was still able to win the game. And I think they were able to win the game because they minimized turnovers, because they had some stretches of good defense against Syracuse, although not an entire game of good defense. They had some stretches of good effective offense against Syracuse, although not an entire game of good offense. But they had enough stretches and they made a few free throws in the final minute to win that game. And we talked about that yesterday. Overall, but there again, there was another game against a high major opponent where Pitt got out rebounded. They just were finally able to pull out the victory. A little bit less of a challenge, or what should be a little bit less of a challenge on the glass against North Carolina tonight, which I think is good. And we've seen teams kill them with the offensive rebounds, right? Carolina is not a great offensive rebounding team, and I think that'll help Pitt. Now they'll still get probably more than what they average, I would say, because I don't think Pitt is going to magically become that much better at rebounding. But I don't expect Carolina to put on the kind of rebounding display that we've seen a few of these other teams and individual players execute against the Panthers. Defensively, you gotta. It's RJ Davis. I mean, the guy has been there for 16 years. He's going to get the Jerry McNamara Lifetime Award. For just never leaving college, and he'll be on Carolina's. Well, I was going to say he'll be on Carolina's bench next year. I would say he'll be on Carolina's bench next year as a coach or a player. One way or the other, RJ Davis is going to be back. That's going to be a real challenge. But fortunately for Pitt, I think fortunately for Pitt, if you were going to pick a matchup, again, like an opponent's strength, right? And you say, you could say, well, I would rather Pitt face a team where the strength is in the backcourt or the strength is in the front court. I think you would pick backcourt because Pitt's best defenders, really, they're three good defenders on this team are Ishmael Leggett, Damian Dunn, and Zach Austin, and two of those three are guards. And Austin is capable of getting on a guard as well. So I think you're probably not going to neutralize RJ Davis, but I think Ishmael Leggett and Damian Dunn should be able to make life difficult for him, difficult enough that he can't take over the game. And here again, we come back to some of the advantage of not having Armando Bacot, because now you don't have to commit as much manpower to defending in the post. Which is going to cut down on the opportunities from the perimeter, cut down on the opportunities to get good drives and get good looks for RJ Davis. And so I think those two things sort of work together, that I think your best defenders are guards, which helps against a team like Carolina where the best offensive players are guards. And then, I think you don't have to defend Carolina the way you had to in the past just to sort of give yourself a chance. You didn't want Bacot to kill you, and you had to sort of try to keep him under control, even if it meant sending a lot of guys at him. Well, you don't have to do that as much this year. And that's going to free up more defensive help to stop Davis and try to keep him contained. Defensively, I think Carolina is just okay. I don't think they have a great post presence, but I think there were, I know it was a little bit down on the Syracuse game yesterday, but I think there were enough positive signs of running offense, of guys playing within themselves, of Damian Dunn finding his role, of Jalen Lowe in the second half really kind of finding a role, of, Zach Austin. Like, these guys have had these roles all season and they've bounced in and out of them, but I think they showed some real signs of progress at times in that game on Saturday. The challenging thing was that they just didn't do it consistently enough. It was just for stretches. This team needs to become more consistent. But I think I think those opportunities to run that kind of offense should be there again. I think Jalen Lowe is due for a game where he plays pretty well all the way through. He was close in the Syracuse game. Obviously some foul issues kind of limited him, and maybe it would have been a full game of good productive play if not for that. But I think there are little things you see in the last few games of Lowe heading in the right direction. Same thing with Ishmael Leggett. Damian Dunn still working his way back. Maybe still getting comfortable after missing so much time due to his injury. The center question, there's no good answer to the center question. There is a good answer to the center question, and it's more minutes for Guillermo Diaz-Graham at the 5. Just doesn't seem to be something that's going to happen. I don't know why. And who knows? Maybe this will be the game where they change it up and Guillermo plays a ton at the 5. I'm okay with still going with your starting lineup of, Lowe, Leggett, Austin, Guillermo, and Corin. But pretty much your first sub, I want to see either Guillermo comes out and then subs in for Corin in a few minutes, or somebody subs in, Jorge subs in or Dunn subs in, and Guillermo takes over at the 5. And then you just get back and forth. I think after the first 4 minutes, you don't need 25 and 2 on the court together. You want to stick with 25 and 2 on the court together for the first few, or to start the game, start that second half, fine. But I don't think you need to stick with it for very long. I think you have better options playing both of those guys. And I'm not completely, done with Cam Corin the way I think maybe a lot of people are. Not everybody, but I think a lot of people. I think he's still a useful player. I think he's a valuable player offensively. He is a big body. He just needs to be more physical. The size is there. I think the ability is there. He needs better awareness and more physicality. It just doesn't seem to, for a guy his size, he should be hurting people a little bit more. And you just don't get a sense that he is. You don't get a sense that he's initiating or absorbing contact. You don't get the sense that he's really fighting for some of those things that you have to be physical to win, particularly on the glass. And that's probably part of the reason, although, it's probably part of the reason that the rebounding is what it is. Although our guy Steven Gertz pointed out in his film breakdown yesterday that some of it seems to be a lack of awareness from Corin as far as where to go and how to execute around the basket to get more rebounds. You would think that'd be the kind of thing he would have a real sense for, given his size and the position he's probably played his whole career, his whole life. But it just doesn't seem to be there. I still think he's useful as an offensive player. I think he can get you a lot of points and scoring in the post, but not so much that there's not, I would not say he's that valuable that you can't get good things out of using Guillermo there and subbing in, Papa Amadou Conti for a handful of minutes every game. And then Jorge Diaz-Graham can play at the 4. And, there's all these options, which we've talked about a lot of times. And it's just a question of whether or not they'll do it, or, whether they'll try to have a rotation going and get guys out there and get different looks and see what you can come up with, or it'll be like the second half against Syracuse and they'll never sub. What was the only sub in the second half against Syracuse? It was, I shouldn't say that never subbed. They subbed right at the very end. When in the final minute when they wanted to get Guillermo on the court for offense. But prior to that, 13 minutes. 13-minute mark, they brought in Damian Dunn for Guillermo and didn't bring Guillermo back in until the final minute. And so, I don't think you can play it that way. I think you've got to rotate more. I think you've got to get more guys on the court. You've got talented players, capable players who can help you win games and have helped you win games. You have to be willing to adjust, even if it's midseason, even if it's with only a dozen games left to play in the regular season. You have to be willing to adjust, and you have to be willing to use the guys you have, because I think there are winning players out there. Jeff Capel certainly enjoyed his fair share of winning against North Carolina since Capel became the head coach at Pitt. He is 5-4 against the Tar Heels overall, 5-3 in the regular season. Incidentally, only 2-3 at the Petersen Events Center, but 3-0 in Chapel Hill, which I think is very interesting, unless I misread the schedule, which might be the case. But Capel has had success against Carolina. I don't know if it means a little something extra to him and his brother Jason, or if it's just how it works out. But they've had some success against Carolina, and tonight's a big one to get keep that going, to get get back on top, get a good quality quad 2 win at home, and keep yourself right in that mix. Currently for a bubble spot, but if you can win games like this, all right, set the quad 1 games aside, but you win a game like this, you win at Notre Dame, you win at NC State, you get all the quad 3 and quad 4 games, and then if you get one of those quad 1 games, you're probably pretty much a lock. And quite frankly, even if you don't get one of those quad 1 games, you lose those 4, but you go 8-4 down the stretch with all the wins in the quad 2 and 3 and 4, you should be a lock at that point too. It's right there for Pitt. Like, the opportunity is right there, and they're getting a vulnerable North Carolina team that they can beat. So they need to go and take care of it. They need to go win this game, take care of business, get Pitt's first win against North Carolina in Pittsburgh since December of 2022. So the Nelly Cummings Jamarius Burton year. They swept Carolina that season, got the win at home in December, that first ACC game, 76-74 win. Got to go do it tonight. All right, we will I'm guessing we won't break down the game on tomorrow's Morning Pitt since it's a late game. We'll probably take something a little bit earlier in the day, talk about football transfers and that kind of thing. But we'll certainly have a lot of basketball conversation on the live show on Wednesday night, so make sure you tune in here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com for that. Right here, Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m., me and Jim Hammett and you get together and talk about Pitt sports. And it's always a lot of fun to do so. So make sure you tune in there. If you're worried that you're going to miss it, just subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on your notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live, and that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. These daily morning Pitt videos, press conferences, interviews, live shows, all those different things. You can find it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks for tuning in today. I hope your week is off to a great start. Enjoy your Tuesday. Have fun at the game tonight. And we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.